Welcome eTeachers to this section of our training course, Google Quizzes. Google Quizzes is a set of extended features and functions of Google Forms, which we looked at very closely in another section of this course. The difference between forms and quizzes is a bit subtle, but very important. Forms can be used to conduct surveys and collect feedback from students in a rich variety of ways, which teachers can then analyze and also share and present to students in many attractive formats. Quizzes has all of these features as well, but by toggling on quizzes within forms, you have a number of additional functions related to assessment as well that can be very helpful and important. Quizzes essentially adds the ability to give points, automatically score quizzes, conduct marking, grading, giving feedback, and collating data, all very easily, all very accessible. So in short, Forms and Quizzes are both great apps for teachers. I would say Forms is more about getting feedback, perhaps submitting tasks or assignments. Quizzes is more about assessment, grading, scoring, marking, giving formative and summative assessment. Okay, if you are not already familiar with Forms, we would recommend you start with that section of the course and then come back to this Quizzes section afterwards. If you've used Forms and want to get familiar with the extended functions Quizzes offers, all right, you're in the right place, so let's get started. To create a quiz in Google Forms, we begin with the basic template of a form, as we did in that section, Forms. First, we need to give our quiz a name. Let's go to the top here and enter the name of our quiz. In this demo lesson, I'll share an ebook called How to Catch the Wind with my students, and this quiz is supposed to test how well they understand the story. So I'll call my quiz How to Catch the Wind Reading Activities. That's clear enough, both in terms of the content and the skills, so students will know the gist of this quiz from the title. Same goes for the quiz form file. You need to give it a name so that later you'll be able to locate it easily. To do that, just click it again, and Google Forms will sync the name of the file from the name of the quiz that we just created. Of course, you can give the quiz file a more detailed name if you like, if you want to add the class, the date, or any other details to help you stay organized. All right. Under the title of the form here, I'm going to give some instructions to my students. Notice, like the survey form we created before, you'll be able to format the text by making it bold, using italics, or underline. You can even insert a link here. That might be very useful. And of course, you can number the sentences, use bullet points, or just click here to clear all the formatting. Now I've added the title and description of my quiz. The next step is most important. Okay, let me say it again. For a Google quiz, this step is most important. Why? Because we're going to convert our Google form into a quiz. So to do that, go to the Settings tab, and right at the top, you can toggle on this setting, Make this a quiz. This now enables the quiz functions of Google Forms, such as automatic grading of multiple choice questions and some short answer questions and other features that we'll explore together here. You can see here below the top, you can allow the quiz grades to be released to students either immediately after their submission, or you can allow them to be released later after your manual review of the results. Select that option depending on whether you want to give additional feedback to your students, for example, or whether you prefer returning grades at a time when you can help the students understand and revise, say in class. But often just getting the grade and noting which questions they got right and wrong may be adequate for their review. So you'll probably want to use both functions at different times. The next category is Chromebooks, which is an interesting feature if you have managed Chromebooks in your school. That allows you to control some of the laptop features, such as locking other browser tabs while taking a Google quiz. And that adds some security for higher stakes school-based assessment. Okay, we usually won't use that one, but the next section is much more important and relevant for e-teachers. And this is respondent settings. The first one is missed questions. If we toggle this on, students will be able to see the questions that they missed. The next one, if toggled on, will show them which questions they answered correctly after the grades are released. If point values is toggled on, Google will show students how many points each question was worth. Fair enough? Next, I can set the default question point value. If many or most of your questions are normally valued at, say, 1, 2, 5, or 10, or whatever, you can just make it easy to set that by turning on the default question point value. I won't do that now because later I'm going to show you how you can give a specific amount of points for each of your questions depending on the question type or value. Now, while we're at it, let me show you around the responses section of the quiz settings. Here in the first option, with this on, you'll be able to collect students' email addresses. We have to turn this on to conduct a quiz or assessment because then Google Forms can associate the students' accounts and their responses. In other words, we don't have any anonymous quizzes or assessment, right? All right, then here, because it's turned on, we can send students a copy of their responses upon request. So that is a nice and useful feature because then students will have a record of what they did in the quiz or test, which of course they can then use for reviewing their work. The next option is allow response editing. So you should allow that only if you want your students to be able to change their answers after they submit a quiz. So if your quiz is a homework assignment or a formal assessment, for example, you will probably want to leave this off so students can't change their answers later. You may also want to restrict your quiz to users from your organization. Up to you. If students are using private Gmail accounts, don't use that. Okay, and as for limit to one response, you'll almost always want to leave this on, of course, so students cannot submit multiple times. Limiting responses is almost always useful, whether you're doing a survey form or a quiz, but especially for any type of assessment. Okay, this next section is called Presentation, and here you can change the settings to control how your quiz and students' responses are presented to students. Okay, so for example, here you can enable a progress bar so students can see how much of the quiz they have finished as they take it. That is especially nice if you have a long quiz with multiple sections. But if it's just a short, say 5 questions quiz, a progress bar is usually not necessary. Okay, shuffle question order gives a little added measure of security if your students are answering questions, say at the same time on different devices and might be inclined to compare their answers. But sometimes your quiz questions are in a logical order related to something like a topic or a text. So I don't always use this feature, but I will enable it for this demo. Moving on, when students submit a quiz, a confirmation message will be shown to them. Here you can click Edit to change the message to something specific to your class, or just to add your name to the message, whatever you like. Of course, I don't want my students to be able to submit again, so I would disable this. But Google has already disabled it for me because I chose limit to one response earlier. If you allow view a summary of the results, students will be able to see the summary of the results, naturally. But I think in general, teachers will want to discuss the results with students in class. So for now, I think I'm going to keep this disabled. Finally, in this section, you can toggle on Disable Autosave, which means that if this is off, autosave is on, and I will leave it that way for students' convenience. Okay, this default section will be very convenient for you if you use Google Quizzes regularly. With this form defaults, you can choose to apply the settings you chose to automatically apply to all of your new quizzes. You can collect emails by default. Of course, an important way to confirm which students submitted which response, as we mentioned. And then here, under Question Defaults, you can also mark all the questions as required or mandatory by default, which is often very useful with quizzes. But I won't choose that now. I'll show you how you can do it question by question later on. Okay, so those are the settings of your Google form when it's in quizzes mode. Very useful to read those carefully and set them correctly before you create your quiz, depending on your assessment needs and the objectives. But of course, you can also change them later after you set your questions. Let's return to our questions template now by clicking the Questions tab, so we can add some content to our demo quiz. We will start with something important, your students' names. You can see at the top of the quiz that students have to submit their email, because I turned that on in the settings. But I don't necessarily know which students have participated or answered the questions other than by this email address, which is not necessarily very convenient unless you happen to know all of your students' email addresses. So I always recommend that you ask your student's name on the quiz for convenient reference. Something that I always do, which you can do here. Complete name. Okay, of course asking students to write their name would be a kind of short answer question, and Google recognizes that. So it has updated the question type to short answer. All you need to do is make this question required so students can't skip it. Now I'm going to add our first content question by clicking this plus icon here. I've mentioned that this is an ebook reading activity, and so I'd like my students to be able to know exactly what my question is referring to. Now, one way to do that is to add a reference, such as an image. Click the photo icon here to access a variety of ways to add an image to your quiz. You can actually import an image from the reading book. You could take a screen cap from an ebook, or even just take a picture of it from a printed book and upload it to your computer. Other options include snapping a picture from webcam, pasting a link, importing a picture from your Google Photos collection, Google Drive, or search within Google Images. Now here we can see the Google ecosystem at work. If you take a screen cap on your phone or iPad, for example, and then save it to your Google Photos, you can then add it to your Google quiz in this step. All right, but I have already uploaded the ebook pictures that I want to use onto my desktop, so I can just add them to my quiz from this option here, Upload. Let's insert our picture right now for the first question, this page reference from our book. Once it's inserted into the form, you can click the three dots icon here and choose to align your picture to the left, in the middle, or to the right. You can also change the image or remove it, or at the bottom there, add a caption. That's a very cool option for English teachers, as you can add vocabulary or a sentence or two to your pictures for students' reference. I think I'm just going to align it to the center, then ask my question based on this page here. So this question is a multiple choice question, so I don't need to change the question type, but I do need to update the options for possible answers down below. Okay, so I provided three options for this question, and as we saw before in forms, you can click here to remove the option, or you can drag this icon to reposition the options up or down the list. Please note that because this is a quiz and not a form, it's very important for you to assign points to the question. Okay, for example, for this question, I'd like to give 5 points. And then here, I need to select the correct response, also very important. Notice that under the options, you have this add feedback icon. So I can leave some feedback, and also important to note, I have 2 kinds of feedback shown in the tabs. For a multiple choice question, I can give feedback for incorrect answers or for students who have provided correct answers. Now, assessment research is clear that students benefit a lot from targeted, specific feedback. But as teachers, you also know how exhausting it can be to provide a lot of feedback. So here is where we begin to unlock the power of Google Quizzes. If you can take some time to leave feedback in the quiz, you can automate it for all of the students who take the quiz. And you also have this resource available, just like a PowerPoint, and you can recycle it and use it again later, of course, adjusting it if you like for the next class that you give it to. Okay, for this question, I'm going to give some feedback for incorrect answers that encourages students to develop the habit of using a dictionary. And I can actually hold their hand a little bit to help them do that. After writing the reminder, I can add a URL to direct them to an online dictionary so they can explore the word meanings proactively, developing good independent learning skills. Here I choose the word for the link display word, and once it's confirmed, click Add, and you'll see this will be an active link for students. Click that purple Save button to save your feedback. Notice that here you have the pencil and trash bin icons to edit or delete the feedback if you like, but if you're okay with it, you can click Done to save this question, the options, the answer keys, and the feedback. Lastly, all you need to remember with the question is to make it required so students have to do it and can't skip this. Let's look at a couple more options under the More 3 dots icon now. You can actually add a description for any particular question here, which is really great if you want to give explicit instructions or reminders to students about a question. And you can also shuffle the order of the options here. Well, that means that the order of the optional answers will vary from student to student, which is very useful if you want to discourage them from cheating. So if that's useful to you, I recommend you use the shuffle options here for each question rather than the shuffle questions order we saw earlier in the settings. As here, the order of your questions is preserved, which is often important. But you still have a little added security by having the order of the answers shuffled. Okay, so I think this question is good enough. Let's add another one. Now we'll click the plus icon and start like I did before by clicking the picture icon and adding another picture of a page from our book. I'll align it in the center and then ask my question. This time, as you see, I asked a long answer question to encourage brainstorming and prompt a little higher order divergent thinking, perhaps. Now, for an open-ended question, I don't need to give alternative options, of course, but I still do need to click Answer key and give the correct number of points for the question. In this case, like the previous one, I'm going to give it 5 points. And again, I have the opportunity to leave feedback, but this time, because it's a long answer question, the feedback will be given for any answer, whether the student is right or wrong, because of course Google Quizzes doesn't know. You'll have to mark the long answer questions manually. So I'll write some hint in the feedback, letting students know that they can think about their experience, they can use their imagination, or they can think about what they've learned from science about wind power. But I will also remind them to stay on topic. And in this way, I hope I can encourage divergent and creative thinking, as that's one of the objectives of the question. Okay, let's save that example of a long answer question and click Done. Again, don't forget to toggle on Make It Required. If you want to add a description now, you can find that option in the 3 dots menu. I want to guide my students a bit, so here I'll tell them to write at least 2 sentences, to use their own words, but to help them out, I'll also give them a little prompt to get them started if they need that. Okay, for this question, let's go back to the 3 dots menu again and look at the other option we saw there earlier, response validation. Let's choose that now to see what we can do with it. Response validation is basically a way to predetermine or require certain features in a response. In this example, I can require a certain length of answer and require my students to write, say, no less than 50 characters to ensure that it's not too short. This can be a nice way to guide or remind students what you expect, or you may just forget about response validation and see what you get. It is a helpful option if you want to fix certain requirements for students' answers. For our next question, let's look at some more features of Google Quizzes. This time we want to ask a short answer question. We can start in the same way by importing a picture first, aligning it, and then asking our question. Now we have to change the question type. So if Quizzes doesn't automatically select the correct question type for you, you can change it from this menu of many options. We'll change it from multiple choice to short answer question. Now we have to go to answer key, and I'll give 5 points again for this question. Remember that in the settings, we could have set 5 points as the default for every question, and you may want to do that when you make your quiz. If you do, you can always edit the number of points as you write each question, but the default would just be 5. In my case, I wanted to show you this method of just adding the number of points for each question one by one as you go. That gives you a lot of flexibility. Now please notice this great feature for short answer questions. You have the option here to write a correct answer. If you do that, you can also add more correct options below it. Then you can tick the Mark All Other Answers Wrong box. Now if you do this, you're basically programming Google to mark the question for you. It will mark any correct answers that you give as right, and if you tick that box, it will mark any other answers as wrong. However, you have the option, if you don't tick that box, you can manually check whether you accept alternative answers to the ones that you've given. But for this question, keep it simple. I'll leave it blank, as I want to allow a wide variety of answers anyway, and so I'll just mark this question manually to consider them one by one. Then later in this section, I can show you how to do that. But that correct answer option is great if you're looking for just one or a few number of clearly defined correct answers, like a vocabulary word, say, or a grammar item, like what is the gerund of swim? Okay, there can't be too many correct answers, obviously. So I think that's a wonderful feature of Google Quizzes. Next, I'm going to give some feedback to this question. I want to remind my students to read the attached picture carefully. Once you've written your feedback or guidance, you can click Save the Feedback and then click Done. Again, this is a short answer question, and I'll make it required, as usual. When you click the 3 dots here, you can also validate the response. I'll use that again, but this time to limit the maximum length so that it's truly a short answer question. I'll choose 20 characters as the maximum allowed. Remember, though, that response validation is totally optional. Most teachers I know don't use this feature, but we want to show you all these options in quizzes in case they're useful to you. You can go for it. Now, Google Quizzes, as I said before, offers many different question types you can choose from. For my next question, I'm going to create a new kind of question, a checkbox question. Let's start by importing a picture again for the question reference. And I'll use the More menu here to align it in the center again and ask my question here. So a checkbox question allows students to choose as many options or answers as they like, unlike a multiple choice question, which allows them to choose only one answer. So we'll change the multiple choice question to a checkbox question here. And then we need to provide the possible options for students to choose from here. So let me write a few possibilities. So that gives students a few options for the question. They can choose any that they think are right based on their reading and understanding. Remember, you can always remove an option by clicking this icon. You can add additional options here, and you can reposition the options here. Below the options here in the answer key, you should give the correct number of points for this question. Since we have 2 correct responses for this question, I'm going to give 10 points. Of course, remember to tick the box to select the correct answers. That's very important. If you don't click the correct answers, then all of the students' answers will be marked wrong. Okay, once you're happy with your question, it's always nice to leave some feedback for your students. In this case, I'll show you how to leave some video feedback. So for example, if a student didn't answer this question correctly, I might want to invite them to watch a relevant video to revise the topic for the question. I'll write some guidance here. To insert the video, you can simply click this play video icon to insert the video, and then here you have 2 tabs giving you a couple of options. You can either search the video in YouTube, or you can just paste the link if you have it ready. I'm going to search for a video with some keywords. So YouTube has generated a number of good options already. I'll select one of them and click Save Here, and done. So that is the last question I'm going to create for my demonstration quiz on this book, How to Catch the Wind. As with Google Forms Survey, you can always click the 2 pages icon here to duplicate a question if you're going to create a similar one. That's very convenient because then you don't need to start writing all over from the beginning. You can just write your new question starting with the duplicate as a draft. But in this case, as I'm done writing questions, I'll just delete that extra question for now. Remember to make the question required. And if you like, in the 3 dots, you can shuffle the order of the options to discourage cheating again. The next thing I'd like to show you is how to manage your questions. If you want to reorder the questions, it's easy to do that by clicking and holding this little handle icon of 6 dots, then dragging the whole question to move it wherever you want it. So for example, I'll just move this last question to the top. And if I want to undo any of the changes I've made, I can click on this backward arrow icon here, and it will undo that move and send my question back to the end where it was before. And of course, you have the redo option as well. Now that we've written our questions, I'd like to show you how to use the sections feature of Google Quizzes. Remember that at the beginning of my quiz, I asked students to provide their complete name, and then I went on to ask them about their understanding of the story. So I think this is a good place to add a section break. To do that, I'll go to the question before where I want the break, and then I'll click this 2 bars icon, really 2 sections, and that will add a new section. You see the quiz has immediately been divided into two sections, sections 1 and 2. And here you can name the section. For example, I can just leave the title of our reading book as the title for this section, so students know that this is the part where the question on their reading book will begin. Next, in section 1, you can see that the name of the first section is actually the same as the name of the quiz, but we have this question here about adding your complete name. So if we want to have a title for a question or a part of a section, we can always click on this TT icon, a nice set of initials, to add a title anywhere you like. I will call this personal information. I can also add a description below. For example, I can ask my students to provide their full name and give a sample format, including both Chinese and English names to make it very clear. Now, that's a title and description for the first question, so I'll drag this icon and put it above the complete name question. Okay, our quiz is shaping up. I think it looks great. Now, let me just mention something important here for the use of Google Quizzes. It may be a little obvious, but I would like to emphasize this. We call these features of Google Forms quizzes, Google Quizzes, when you toggle on the Make This a Quiz option in the settings. But this app is not just for formal evaluation and assessment. Google Quizzes can just as easily and perhaps more often be used for teaching, for assigning guided homework activities, for giving pre-class preparation work, as in flipped lesson activities, or for some kind of practice or revision. Calling it quizzes just brings attention to the assessment and evaluation features of this great e-resource, like automatic grading and feedback and points. But obviously it is for so much more than just giving a quiz to your students. All right, so before we finish our demo activity and move on to reviewing students' answers, I want to show you how you can import a picture and to encourage your students to think about the story. So as you know, we at eTeachers want to encourage contextualized learning and multimedia learning. And here's a way to do that. We already saw how you can add an image to each question, but here I will add a picture to the section as a general reference. I might, for example, want my students to look at the cover of our book as a pre-reading exercise to anticipate, predict, or just guess and think about what this book is about before they read it and answer the questions on the quiz. So let's do that. I'll begin by clicking on the relevant section heading. Selecting this section heading first is important so that the image will appear after the area that you selected where you want it in your quiz. And then click Add Image icon here. Now let's browse and select the picture that I want to import from my PC. This one is the cover of the book, so let me import it and insert it to my quiz. Cool, that looks good. Now when students see this quiz, they should be prompted to think about the title, the content, and maybe some of the concepts of the topic wind. Now we've added all our questions, and we'll want to customize the appearance of our quiz. So to do that, let's go to the top right corner here, and as we did with the form in the previous section, we click this palette icon to change the appearance. We can change the header font, the font size, and the question text. All right, so I won't change any of those default settings now, but you can change them to suit your own style and preferences. But I will update the header image by uploading an image from my desktop. Of course, you could choose from any of the given theme headers which Google Quizzes provides. There are very many. They are often very good and very suitable for a variety of purposes. But if you like, you can just go to Upload to add your own image, as I'm doing here. All right, once you've got it, you can drag this frame box to wherever you want that looks good, and then click Done. The image is then updated to the form, and when you scroll up, you can see there it is. We now have a new header image. You can also change the theme color, but you can see that Google Forms has already automatically generated a few color schemes based on the picture that we just uploaded. Very helpful, very smart. I will choose this blue. I think it's very nice, friendly color. Here we could also change the background color, but I'm just going to leave it because I think it's fine already. We don't have to change anything if it's already good. All right, the quiz is ready. So to be sure, we can click on this eyeball icon to preview it and see if everything looks good to us. It does, and so we are ready to share this form with our students. And we are given some options for how to do that. To begin, click the purple Send button here. To share your awesome resource, you have 3 options: send via email, link, or embed. So if you choose to use email with your students or at your school, you can send it that way. I don't know many teachers who use email, but there it is if you need it or want it. Okay, more often, we will share our quiz with a link. For this option, we can even share a short form link. Just click the shorten URL box. For the last option, you can embed your quiz directly if you're using some web-based platform like Sites or another LMS, such as Google Blogger, which we explore in depth in another section of this course. Now that we have shared our quiz with students, look, we already have 5 responses. Great, let's have a look at those. Of course, whether you have assigned your quiz in class or as homework, and whether you've given your students 10 minutes or 10 days or whatever to complete the activity, you probably have a deadline, a time that they are expected to finish. Now, this is very convenient. If the deadline has passed and you no longer want to allow any new submissions, you can toggle this quiz off. That's very useful, and students quickly learn that they don't have the option to submit it late. Okay, now let's look at these wonderful alternatives to view your students' responses as a summary, by the questions you asked, or by individuals or student by student. Respectively, they're called summary, question, and individual. So the first one is summary, which means that you'll see an overview of students' responses, as I'm showing you now. In the question tab, you'll view students' responses question by question. In this drop-down menu of the questions in the quiz, I can jump to the next question or any question, and I can see how all of the students who took the quiz did on that particular question. I can also click on the forward or backward arrow icon to navigate through different questions. This view format is useful when I'm ready to grade open-ended questions. I can focus on each question and grade the students' responses all at once. So for example, this question, what do you imagine the wind's energy can do, is an open-ended question. And I can just go to each student's answer and mark it as incorrect or correct with the red X or the green check button. Or I can give any number of points for the question up to the total number that I assigned when I wrote the question. So for example, I can give 4 out of 5 for this question. Don't forget to save your changes, and notice that here I can also adjust the feedback. So it's more specific to this particular student or for a particular answer that you receive. This is very cool, very helpful. So that's one convenient way to grade students' responses. Next, let's look at students' responses student by clicking the Individual tab. For example, my student Angel Wong, I can look at her responses all at once, and for the questions which are not automatically already graded by quizzes like the MCQ, I can grade her quiz question by question. For example, what do you imagine the wind's energy could do? I can just give the points here. Whether you choose the question tab or individual tab for your grading really depends on your own grading approach. Choose question if you want to mark the quiz question by question, focused on each student's answers in turn. Alternatively, choose individual if you prefer a more traditional marking approach, marking student by student focused on all of their questions in turn, like I'm showing here. I can just grade the unmarked questions of Angel's quiz. Google Quizzes has already done the automatic part of the marking for me. As with Google Forms, you can also print a particular student's response if you want to keep it or share it. You can also remove a student's answers if for some reason you want to ask them to redo the quiz. You can control that student by student if you like, which may be useful. And notice this important release score button here. When you have graded all the quizzes and are ready to release the scores to your students, click that button, and that will release the results to the student. Whether it's good news or bad news, remember that all the general and particular feedback that you provided will be included to help them learn and review. To view more options for saving the quiz content and responses, you can click this 3-dot icon here. You can select email notifications for new responses, but of course I've turned this quiz off, and so I'm not accepting new responses. You can choose the response destination, which means that you can easily save the student's results to a Google Sheets document and keep it in your Google Drive. Or you can add the results to an existing Google Sheets file. Or here you can download the responses in CSV format as an Excel spreadsheet. You can even print here, or you can delete all of the responses from this quiz. Now, why would you do that? Delete responses is useful if you want to reuse the quiz and invite another class to fill it in later. That will not delete your saved Excel file or sheets, so you still have the student data. So this one click will save you a lot of time and energy, potentially. So that, dear e-teachers, is quite a comprehensive look at the many useful features and options of Google Quizzes. Now, Quizzes allows you many interesting ways to design activities and tailor the questions and content to your students' learning needs. You can use it to give formal or informal assessment and assignments, and its many features allow linking media, doing automatic grading, giving targeted feedback, and presenting the results in a very attractive and readable way for your own follow-up and planning, or for presenting to your students in teaching and revision. Of course, as we said at the start, Google Quizzes is an extension of the Google Forms app, which also has a complete section in this course. We're counting these as two separate sections because of their distinct uses and features. If you'd still like a thorough introduction to forms, you can check out that section in the course. But most importantly, we hope you can start to put these apps to use in designing your own activities and evaluation, and we look forward to seeing what you do. So till then, or when we see you in the next section, happy teaching, e-teachers.